there are so many writing techniques that could be covered, and I'm just going to cover a few. Imagine your entire life you wanted to have a super sharp sword, and now you actually have it, and it is so much sharper than you expected, and it almost scares you. Writing is that way. You always wanted to be able to articulate truth clearly, but now you can, and you almost want to blunt it. So you do. You start adding things like I think or I would say. Don't. Use the sword. Actually speak truth and speak it bravely. Truth has power, and God is allowing you to speak it and speak it well. Showing. How often have we heard show, don't tell? Well, the number one rule when it comes to showing, not telling, is to trust your reader. They are not dumb. They really can understand if you show, not tell. In fact, telling can sometimes weaken your writing by quite a bit, and I'm going to show you some examples. Example number 1, she clenched her jaw, fisting her hands. Number 2, she clenched her jaw, fisting her hands in anger. Now, when I say in anger, I want to tell the reader she's angry, but her body language already told them. And by me stepping back and saying in anger, it actually pulls them out a little bit rather than just letting them see it for themselves. Number 1, she was so angry she wanted to vomit on him. Number 2, oh, if only she could douse him with vomit. The image of him dripping with green was a small consolation. Now, this is actually an example of deep points of view. We are actually inside her head. So even though I'm writing in third person, it is from her perspective. And we are seeing her vision with her and feeling what she feels. And she really, really wants to douse him. This is another example of deep point of view, and I will be going over that more in a couple minutes. But number 1, he tossed something on the table and she realized it was the knife. Number 2, he tossed something on the table. It was the knife. Number 2 is stronger. Again, we are inside her head. We don't need to say she realized it was the knife. We're seeing the knife with her. It was the knife. Now, with words like realized, seemed, felt, often you want to go through your manuscript and just use a search button, and most of the time you can cut almost all of those out. You are just showing. You don't have to say she realized, you just show it. And so a lot of authors will have a list of like 7 or 12 words like that, and they will just search the whole manuscript at the end, and it makes it so much stronger. Number 1, she sank into the numbness, never wanting to feel again. 2, the sadness wearied her until she finally sank into the numbness, never wanting to feel again. Number 1 is stronger and shorter. I don't need to tell you she's sad. You can feel the numbness with her. Number 1, he was mean, ugly, crude, rude, lazy, ornery, and unkind. Or, he was mean, ugly, and crude. Number 2 is actually stronger, even though it is only 3. And that is because 3 is the list of completion. And so when you go any more than 3, it actually sabotages the strength of it. It just becomes this long list that kind of mars in the mind of the reader. Earlier, I asked you to come up with 3 adjectives to describe your hero. And I had the last adjective be the area that was most important, the area that your hero needed to work on. That's because whatever comes last will actually stick in your reader's memory. And so you want to put things that are last at the end of a paragraph or a sentence to be the most important. And this actually gives an example of it. Number 1, I felt for the knife in my pocket, my hands shaking. He was going to kill me. Or 2, he was going to kill me. I felt for the knife in my pocket, my hands shaking. Number 1 is stronger because he was going to kill me, hangs in the air after I finish. It's a perfect end to a chapter or a section. Whatever you have that's important, put it at the end. Your reader will remember it. The last 10 or 20 years, deep point of view has become more popular. So even though it's written in third person, it's not third person omniscient. It is actually written within someone's head. So the way I taught myself how to write deep point of view is I wrote an entire novel in first person, and then I went back and switched it to third person. So you'll see what I did here is I just wrote the top paragraph from Tiffany's first person point of view, and then in the second paragraph I just switched it over to third person. So I can feel Tiffany's sweaty hands on the squirrel trying to catch it, but I can't feel the mom's stomach as the squirrel thuds into it. I can only feel from Tiffany's point of view, not her mom's. So how do you pick your point of view? 3 things. Number 1, your genre. So if you write in historical fiction, you can go first person or third person because both are accepted. But if you're writing youth fantasy, those are almost always in first person point of view. And not only first person, but first person present tense, which is super immersive. If you are not sure of your genre, then just Google Amazon's top 100 sellers list and then look in the look-insides and see what it is that's selling, and it will help you better relate to the readership that you're looking for and understand what will communicate your message best to them. And to communicate the message is part of what you're choosing. I'm writing my first person novella right now, and I ended up choosing to do it that way because the character is so incredibly imbibed in these lies that she has to take this journey out of, that it was best to journey with her inside of her head. And then finally, to add tension helps you choose which kind of point of view. In most books, it is very helpful to get into 2 characters' heads, usually the hero and heroine in a love story, because one character has a secret and the other character is starting to figure it out, but they're misled, they think it's something else, and so most often it adds to the story and adds to the tension to be able to get into both heads. 2 different ways that I practice. Number 1, when I read other books, I will usually read them on my phone, and I'll just flip over to my notes app if I see a really good line that communicates well, and I'll analyze what it is that makes that line powerful. So here's an example. His voice grated like a sword on the whetstone. And so I look at that and I think, okay, what it is that makes me picture that well in my head. And then if I'm not too tired, I will try to rewrite that line for one of my scenes, just so I can analyze, how can I do that? How can I use that tool? And so then I would put, her voice cracked like a breaking branch. And the second way to practice is kind of weird, but it is so useful. When you're feeling any emotion, sadness, anger, fear, joy, just grab your notes app or notebook and write down just a few words about how you're feeling. So like when you're sad and you've been crying, so your skin on your face becomes very sensitive and your mouth is kind of dry and your hands, they actually don't feel as well. There's kind of a numbness to your hands because of all the rest of the emotion your body is feeling. And that's something that you know when you're feeling it, but later when you're trying to write a scene about a character who's sad, it totally flies your mind what it is that you feel like. And so just write down when you're feeling strong emotion and put those emotions to use. And that brings us to editing. Now, if I were to say to you, what is editing? 95% of people would tell me that it is grammar. It is actually other things besides grammar as well. And so we are going to do a very quick overview of those. One of the most expensive kinds of editing is actually developmental. And that is one of the things we've been covering today. All it does is it checks to make sure you have your beat points correct, and it is super helpful. Number 2, evaluation editing. That helps evaluate if you have the right tropes for your manuscript. Youth fantasy is almost always a coming of age trope, and if it's not, it's going to damage your ability to even find your readership. Number 3, content editing. Write voice for your target readership. Should you be writing first person, third person? A lot of that you can kind of check on your own just by looking at the top 100 list, and it does help you learn how to communicate your message in a way to people that you can actually find. Finally, line editing. So this is word choice. I have an author friend, and she spent a lot of money on developmental editing and copy editing, but she didn't pay her editor to do line editing. And so on the very first page of her book, she used the same word twice in 2 paragraphs, and it looked really bad. And I was so sorry for her because she'd spent so much. But that's line editing. Finally, copy editing is grammar. And then proofreading is more grammar. And if I were to give some final advice, I would say to finish your novel. If it's terrible, finish it. If you're flipping back and forth between first and third person, finish it. If you want to go back and restart it and write the opening and you know it's going to be so much better, just finish it. And the reason is that once you have a finished product, you can look at it and you can read it through and you can see why it doesn't work. And it's so much easier to be able to tell where it's meant to go if you get the whole thing done.